Hello there, and welcome to another Python Fundamentals tutorial video on the Future Programmer YouTube channel. In this video, we will be taking a look at a very popular data format used in a variety of different programming applications called JSON. You will learn how you can interact with this data format, how you can convert from JSON into Python, as well as the other way around. So without further ado, let's get started. To start off, what is JSON? Well, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Now, don't let the JavaScript part here throw you off, because although JSON was originally extended from the JavaScript language, JSON is now used in a variety of different applications, which is why many other programming languages, like Python, have native support for working with JSON data. JSON is a very common data format used to store and transfer data over the internet, as well as storing system and program configuration files on your computer. So if you would like to work in applications like web scraping, web applications, or APIs, then JSON will be frequently used. JSON files generally have a file extension .json. Let's first take a look at what JSON files are available in the current working directory of this Python script. So for each item in the current working directory as listed by the listdir function of the OS module, if the item has a file extension .json, I'm going to print out this file. And we can see we have JSON data.json and JSON2.json. Those are the two files that we can work with in this program. So we have JSON data.json right here, and we have JSON2.json, which is currently empty, and we will be writing data into this file. Python has a built-in module in the Python standard library that we can use to interact with JSON data, and it's, well, called JSON. When we want to import this module, we can write import JSON, and since this is built in, we don't have to do any installation process, so we can just run the cell, and now we can use the functionality of the JSON module. If we want to parse a JSON data into Python objects, then the JSON module provides mainly two functions that we can use. We have JSON.load and JSON.load. The difference between those two functions is that JSON.load, the one that does have the S, takes a JSON string as the argument, and it will convert this string into a deserialized dictionary of Python objects. On the other hand, JSON.load, the one that doesn't have a string or doesn't have an S, will take a JSON file object as an argument, and it will do the same thing. It will deserialize the content of the file and return a dictionary of Python objects. Let's first take a look at JSON.load, the one that does have the S, which matches the string, the S here, by the way. So we're going to pass in a string into this function and convert that into a dictionary of Python objects. The first thing we need to do is to open a file connection to this file, this JSON data.json file. So we can write with open JSON data.json as file. By default, this is going to be opening in R mode, so reading only mode, so we don't have to worry about that actually. And this file object has a method related to it, .read. So file.read is going to return the content of this file right here as a string and store it inside this variable content. And we can see content has the value right here, and its type is a string. If we want to convert this string into a dictionary of Python object, we can call the JSON.load function, pass in this string, and the return value will be a Python dictionary, as you can see here, when we print out the type of data. And data, you can see right here, is a dictionary. Notice how in this string from this file right here, the T here is lowercase. And that's because in JSON, Boolean values, true and false, they don't have a capitalized first letter. On the other hand, in a Python dictionary, the T here is capitalized, which tells us that this is now a valid Python dictionary rather than a JSON string. I've actually opened an official Python documentation, which I'll link in the description below, and you can see in JSON, an object will be converted into a dictionary, an array will be converted to a list, and etc. We can also see how true is converted to an uppercase, false is into a Python boolean, and null is converted into none. It's a little bit easier to use JSON.load if we're just converting a file object into a Python object. So we can open the same file the same way, store it inside the file object, file, and we can pass this file object this time, rather than its content, into JSON.load. There isn't an S here, so we can pass file into JSON.load, and the return value will be the same as before. So let's check that by printing out data, which we can see is the exact same as was printed out earlier. We can access the data that we parsed from a JSON file, just like any other dictionaries in Python. Since we have, in here, we have the key first name and also the key last name, we can access their values, future and programmer, by using the square brackets and passing in their keys, so first name and data of last name. So name is going to be equal to future programmer, as we can see in the output. And since the value whose key is hobbies in data, this is a valid Python list, we can iterate through this list using a for loop. So for each hobby in the data whose, in the key or in the value of data whose key is hobbies, we're going to print out the hobby, and we can see the output is right here. The JSON module also allows us to write to JSON files, so we can convert a Python object into JSON. We have two functions as well. We have json.dumps and json.dump. json.dumps, the one that does have the S, will take a Python, or it will convert a Python object and turn it into a JSON string. Notice the S here matches the S here. And json.dump, the one that does not have an S, will convert a Python object into a file. This is the Python object that we're going to work with in this section of the video. So we can see this is pretty similar to what we had before in this file. So let me run this. So X is now defined. And in this file right here, json2.json, currently this file is empty, and we're going to change that. We're going to first, let's take a look at what json.dumps do. So it will convert a Python object into a JSON formatted string. So we're going to pass in X, which is the Python object, into json.dumps, and let's print this out with an ending of a \n, so a new line character, so we can easily see the separation of the different print statements. So json.dumps X now returns a string, since we can see, first of all, this is now a lowercase t, since we want this to be in a JSON format rather than a Python syntax. In json.dumps, we can also specify the indentation that we want. In this case, I've specified an indentation of 2 levels, and we can see we have 2 spaces here, 2 spaces here, 4 spaces here, since this is a nested indentation, and this is a little bit nicer looking. And we can also specify whether we want to sort the keys in this JSON formatted string. And you can see early on we had name, hobbies, age, and likes Python. Now we have age first, hobbies second, likes Python, and name as the last 2. So this is how we can convert a Python object into strings. Now let's see how we can convert, or how we can write a JSON string into a JSON file. Well, it's the same idea as before in the last video when I talked about how we can write any string into a file. We can just open a file in W mode or A mode, both would work. And we're going to call the write method of the file object. And in this file, we will write the value returned by json.dumps, and we're converting x. And since we're opening this file connection in a W mode, it's going to rewrite the entire file rather than appending it. So let's take a look at this file. Let me actually first run this cell again. And now let me reload this tab, and you can see we have the JSON data nicely written in here. And we can also use the indentation keyword argument here. So we can specify an indentation of 2 spaces in the json.dumps function. Let me run this. And in this tab, you can see after I reload it, we have a indentation of 2 spaces before each key, or 4 in the case of the more nested values. Now, it's a little bit easier if we want to use the dump function of the JSON module if you're just wanting to write to a file. So we're going to open the same file in the same way, in the same mode, and we're going to call the json.dump function. And there are 2 required arguments. We have x, which is the Python object that we want to convert into JSON, and then the file object that we have opened the connection to. Feel free to pass in the indentation or the sort keys as you go. So I'm going to run this and reload this, and well, it's the same data and it's the same indentation, so nothing has really changed, but hopefully you can see this is actually a little bit easier. I've just shown you how to work with json.dumps as well, because now you can convert Python objects into strings as well as file objects. To summarize, JSON data is now used in many different situations, and the skills that you have acquired in this lesson will now allow you to work with this type of data format using Python. And that's it for working with JSON data in Python. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below, and I'll try my best to answer them. In the next videos of this series, we will be practicing everything that we've learned in this course by making a few fun and useful projects in Python. In the meanwhile, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Future Programmer if you want to learn more about programming. With that said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in another tutorial.